If we were all meeting together in person right now and we were in the student area upstairs, and if I asked everyone in the room who has ever experienced something that has made you feel stressed or worried to stand up, everyone in the room would be on their feet. Even though it can sometimes feel like we're alone when it comes to things that stress us out, the reality is we aren't. We all have things that trigger us and that set us off. Things that make us feel anxious, worried, irritated, or depressed. When I was in middle school, there were a lot of things that stressed me out, but one of them was that I wouldn't get into the right classes to get me into the right places that I need to be in order to be successful in life. It was a lot of pressure, and I remember feeling highly emotional about it. Now, you may not have the same worries that I did when I was in middle school, but the point is, experiencing things that are uncomfortable, stressful, and even depressing is unfortunately a part of life for all of us. Things like disagreements with a friend, having your saved information erased on a game, ads you can't skip on YouTube, dropping your phone on the concrete, waiting in lines at amusement parks. Those are all the kinds of things that we'd rather not have to deal with, right? Because we don't like the way that they make us feel. Sometimes the stuff we don't want to deal with is small and easy to move past. If we get frustrated with ads on YouTube, we just don't watch them. We just walk around with a broken screen for a while. We just wait in the long line. Eventually, those problems get solved. Like, we don't have to worry about them forever. But sometimes the things that we'd rather not have to face are bigger issues. They're things that stress us out or upset us in ways that are so big, sometimes we just don't know how to deal with them. Things like the police showing up at our house because our parents are fighting again. A sibling struggling with an addiction or substance abuse, a friend lying to us over and over, feeling like we can't seem to get out of our big, deep hole of depression, not being able to go on the trip at school for one reason or another, being dumped by your boyfriend or girlfriend, having to go back to school after a horrible rumor was spread about you on Instagram, living through a COVID world. These things are much more painful, and because of that, they can make our feelings much more intense. When we feel that deep depression, that hurt, anxiety, fear, the anger, the pain, the shame, I think if we're honest, most of the time we don't even know what to do with that. Maybe we try to do anything to not have to face it. We avoid it so we don't have to think about or deal with the feelings or circumstances that we're experiencing. Or maybe when we're experiencing these things, we do the exact opposite. We feel that deep depression and that hurt and the pain, anxiety, so much so to the point that those intense feelings feel like they are going to take control over us. Or maybe we don't try to avoid our feelings, but we don't really deal with our feelings either. We simply don't know what to do about what we feel, so we don't do anything at all. It paralyzes us. So we all have different ways of dealing with what we feel, and that's called coping. Coping is simply how we deal with difficult circumstances, situations, or feelings in our lives. And there are usually two ways to deal or to cope with what's happening in and around our lives: the helpful way and the unhelpful way. Helpful coping skills are so important. They give us ways to handle our emotions or process what we're dealing with so that we can not only feel better in the moment, but moving forward into the future as well. Helpful coping skills are the things that we do that are good for us. They are healthy ways to deal with our feelings. Now, I know this kind of feels a little elementary or kiddish, but here's what's cool. These things actually act as a reset for our minds and bodies. They help us to kind of restart a tough day. But what's great is that there are a lot more things like this that we can do to deal with things that are stressful and difficult. Things like putting on a favorite playlist, praying, talking to someone like a trusted friend, counselor, or adult, getting plenty of sleep, we underestimate that one, going outside just into nature, journaling, watching funny videos on YouTube, eating healthy food, that's actually really good, brain food, right? But on the opposite end, there are also lots of ways of coping with our feelings that are really unhealthy. There are some unhelpful things that we tend to do to deal with how we feel. They're the things that we try to do to ignore, forget about, or escape from what's happening in and around our lives. These things could be staying in bed for days at a time, binging Netflix or YouTube for hours when we're struggling, punching a wall and breaking things, turning to things like alcohol or drugs, cutting or harming ourselves physically, avoiding or shutting out the people who love and want to help us, spreading rumors or being disrespectful to take the attention off of ourselves, picking fights with our friends or family to get our anger out. And listen, here's the reality. Everybody struggles with this. You, me, your parents, your small group leader, the kids at school who seem to have it all together. Every single one of us struggles to choose healthy ways to deal with what we feel, to cope. And I think one reason for that is because coping can be difficult. Sometimes the stuff that we turn to isn't all that bad, like exercise, naps, video games, ice cream, Netflix, sleep. All that stuff can be helpful when we do them in helpful ways, but sometimes we use these things in unhealthy ways, and that's when they can create more problems. Coping in unhealthy ways can hurt us more than it can help. And here's what I mean. When we go for a run, that's good because it helps us take a break or work out some anxiety. But when we run 4 times a day to avoid our anxiety altogether, that's when it can lead to more harm. Or when we watch a couple of hours of Netflix to just make ourselves laugh when we're sad, that's okay. But when we watch it for like an entire day because we don't want to deal with what's making us sad or stressed out, or maybe just to shirk responsibility, that's not okay. When we take a nap because we're overwhelmed and it's helpful to just turn our minds off and get re-energized, that's okay. But when we sleep all day or sleep late into the day, or we just don't get out of bed, that's not so helpful. See, the problem with all the unhealthy ways to cope is that they only work for a moment. Sure, you might feel better right away, but at the end of that day, that feeling that you're experiencing is still gonna be there. The circumstance that you're struggling with didn't change, it doesn't go away, and it's not gone just because you tried to not think about it for a few hours. Depending on how you choose to cope, it's possible to end up with an even bigger issue to deal with, and that's because unhealthy coping doesn't help you in the long run. And honestly, this type of coping doesn't really help you deal with what you're experiencing. The reality is you're going to face difficult circumstances and big feelings for the rest of your life. And that's why it's so important to think about healthy ways to cope now as a middle schooler. I want that for you, but more than that, I know God wants that for you. The thing is, people have been experiencing intense feelings and difficult situations since the beginning of time. And because of that, we can find a lot of great examples and wisdom about how to handle these kinds of things in God's Word. These are real words that are written by real people who deal with real feelings. In other words, they get it. They're real people just like you. They're not people who are make-believe or just in some story. These are people who have experienced the power of God in their lives, and they wrote it down, and God has used that through generations, through centuries, thousands of years in order to reach His people. So I want to jump into a book of the Bible that's found in the Old Testament, which is the portion of the Bible written before Jesus lived on earth. And this particular book is called Lamentations. It's called that because a lamentation is a way to express deep grief, pain, or sorrow. And a lot of what is written is actually in poetry. And the person who wrote this book, most likely the prophet Jeremiah, was dealing with a lot of sadness in their life at this time. They'd witnessed the destruction of the city of Jerusalem, and it was a pretty horrible situation. A lot of people died, and most of those who survived were starving, injured, and homeless. So let's take a look at what was written after witnessing this devastating situation. I remember my affliction in my wandering, the bitterness and the gall. I well remember them, and my soul is downcast within me. Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for His compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Okay, so let's break this down. First, in this passage, there's a reality check. The author made a choice to be honest about what they were going through, a choice to deal with how they felt. They acknowledged the painful stuff, and they named all the things that were hard for them in that moment. Afflictions, wandering, bitterness, and feeling sad or downcast. All those are words that describe deep pain, sadness, isolation, and feelings of despair that we can all probably relate to. Now, even though what the author experienced was pretty terrible, the feelings they felt weren't bad. It's okay to feel pain and sadness and isolation, despair, and whatever else we might feel. It's when we let those feelings control us or cause us to do unhealthy things that then become a problem. But in the second part of the passage, something changed. The sad author who wrote the sad poetry didn't stay stuck in the sadness. Instead, they made another choice, and this time it was a choice to do something to help deal with their feelings, a choice to take action, and a choice to cope in a more helpful way. The author of Lamentations chose to cope by focusing on God's love and faithfulness. They made the choice to have hope. Well, how? By reminding themselves every time they woke up, got out of bed, maybe made breakfast, that each morning is a fresh start. That with God, there's always a possibility for more, for better, for help, and for hope. Does that mean that things just suddenly got better? Nope. There was still a lot of sadness and destruction all around, but they coped with what they were experiencing in a healthy and helpful way. They put good things into their brain. They reminded themselves every day that God's compassion never fails. And with God's love, they didn't have to be controlled by the circumstances and feelings. And that truth is the same for us. You can have hope. You can choose to deal with the painful feelings and emotions that you experience in helpful ways. You can find healthier ways to cope that will carry you forward. You can choose what to do with how you feel. And I don't know about you, but I want to choose healthy and helpful things that will make my life better. And while coping in healthy ways may not fix everything or make what I'm dealing with go away, it will help me manage the big feelings and difficult circumstances that I may face. It might even help not make things worse. And I want that for all of us. I want us to cope in ways that are helpful. I want us to remember this, that you can choose what to do with how you feel. So how do we do that? How do we choose healthy and helpful ways to cope? You can start by asking yourself two questions. The first question is, what's one part of my life that's difficult to deal with? And whatever it is for you, be honest with yourself about what's making it difficult for you to cope. Simply naming it and talking about what you're dealing with is the best place to start. And the second question is this: what do I usually do when I feel this way? Do you avoid, ignore, procrastinate, blame, get grumpy, get help, go on a walk, pray, practice deep breathing? What are your go-to coping skills? Are they helpful? Are they healthy? Or are they not? Now, here's the encouraging part. You get to choose helpful ways to deal with what you feel. You have the power right now to change the way that you cope for the better. So the next thing you can do, start by choosing to change some patterns for the better. Instead of shutting down, talk to someone like your small group leader, a parent, or someone older than you that you can trust. Instead of binging Netflix, give yourself a time limit. Maybe take a 1-hour break from the assignment that's stressing you out instead of procrastinating for days. Set an alarm to remind you when break time is over. Try listening to a worship playlist. Shameless plug, there's links for that on our Instagram and all over the place. Try writing down a prayer or looking up some verses in the Bible to help you shift your focus to what you know to be true about God and how He feels about you. Whatever it is, make just one small step toward a healthier way of coping. And remember, this isn't just like a one-time fix. Like the author of Lamentations said, you'll need God's help on a daily basis. So ask for it. Let that be one of your first steps to helpful coping. If you're struggling to know where to start, maybe begin where the writer of this scripture did. Shift your focus to what you know to be true about God and how He feels about you. When you feel yourself facing overwhelming feelings or hard challenges, focus on God. Ask for His help. Remember what is true about how He feels about you, how He gave His only Son so that you can know Him more. He promises that He's working for good in everything that you're going through. Even if it's really, really hard, He says that He'll never leave you. He loves you too much. He's with you right now, and His heart is filled with love for you. He's your biggest fan. This is what's true about your life. But when you're going through something hard, it can take up a lot of brain space. So try to take over some of that brain space with these things that are true. That can be your first step towards healthy coping. Now, let me stop here and say that for some of you, this isn't going to be that simple. Maybe the behaviors that you're using to cope are more than just unhealthy, they're actually harmful. They're hurting you and they're leading you down a difficult path. And if that's you, I just want to encourage you to not try to tackle it alone. Get guidance from older people in your life that care about you, maybe your parents or another family member, small group leader, or even reach out to me. You don't have to go through what you're going through alone. And remember, you can choose what to do with how you feel. you can start practicing helpful ways to cope right now. And that's actually a pretty good segue to make sure that you join with us next week, because we're going to begin a whole new series kind of about this, all about how we deal with emotions, right? We all have them. Some of us don't express them. Some of us express them too much. Some of us don't even know what emotions we're feeling and therefore have a hard time processing them at all. How does God equip us to utilize our emotions, the ones that He gave us? That is what our next series is all about. So make sure you don't miss out. Thank you guys for tuning in and being a part of today's online gathering. Don't go anywhere, and we'll be back with our main service in just a moment.